Election day is now less than a week away, but more than 50 million people have already cast their ballots during early voting. And according to the University of Florida's early vote tracker, those millions of early voters are split pretty evenly between registered Democrats and Republicans, around 39% and 36% respectively. And part of the reason we're seeing such high numbers of Republicans voting early this time is in large part due to the fact that Donald Trump has been encouraging his supporters to vote early, which of course is a complete 180 from the 2020 election where he continually attacked the exact same system. But also because of this massive influx of early voters, which has been historic in some of the key swing states, this process hasn't always gone smoothly. Like for example, Pennsylvania found itself at the center of backlash and controversy after a very messy situation that left people in Bucks County waiting for hours, bringing about confusion and frustration, widespread misinformation, and allegations of voter suppression. Now to be very clear here, Pennsylvania does not technically have early voting. Instead, they have a process that is very different from most states. And actually, it's a system that notably was passed by the state's then Republican legislature back in 2019. And here is how it works. Instead of allowing people to vote early using voting machines like many other states do, Pennsylvania does what's called on-demand mail voting. And to participate in that, registered voters go to their county government offices, request a ballot, and fill out an application. That application is then reviewed on the spot to make sure that the voter is eligible, and once they're approved, the ballot's printed. It's a process that usually takes like 10 to 12 minutes if all goes right. Then, once the ballot is printed, the voter has the choice to fill it out and return it immediately on the same trip, take it home, or have it sent to their house. But when you have this huge surge of voters, 10 to 12 minutes a person, it adds up, especially when given the fact that each election office has just one single printer for the early in-person ballots. And many lack the resources needed to cope with this surge in early voters, with Bucks County officials explaining that they had a fixed number of staff and a fixed budget. And so unsurprisingly, these elections offices were completely overwhelmed and unprepared to deal with the massive influx of people for many of the days that the on-demand process was underway, with offices at times even then turning people away if they got into line too late because staff wouldn't be able to process their applications before closing, telling them to come back again the next day. But of course, big thing, there are only so many next days, and everything really came to a breaking point yesterday, the final day for on-demand mail voting. And so you had these election officials in a super tight spot, right? They only had until midnight to process all the applications for mail-in ballots. And the Pennsylvania Department of State had asked every county to make sure that every voter who was in line by 5 p.m. could at least submit an application for a mail-in ballot. And so to make sure that they could process everyone who got in line by 5 p.m. and still reach that midnight deadline with their limited staff and resources, Bucks County election officials had to make a game time decision. And specifically, what they did is they decided to cut the line of the people who wanted to receive their ballots immediately at 2:45 p.m. But, and this is the key thing here, those people could still apply for ballots. They just couldn't get them at that exact instant, which also meant they couldn't fill them out and return them on the spot. With Bucks County later clarifying on X yesterday that instead, they were only given the option to receive their ballot by mail or pick it up later this week. And with that adding, we are aware that due to a miscommunication, individuals in line to apply for on-demand mail-in ballot were briefly told they could not be accommodated. In fact, these voters were given the opportunity to submit mail-in ballot applications on Tuesday, noting that everyone who is still in line by 5 p.m. still was able to apply for their ballot as requested by the Department of State. But all of this, it still made for a very confusing situation with all the chaos and poor communication, prompting allegations, mostly from conservatives here, that people were being denied the right to vote early. With Trump supporters and even top Trump campaign officials claiming that officials were cutting the lines early and preventing people from voting. And with that, also alleging that Democrats were suppressing voters and accusing them of interfering in the election to prevent Republicans from voting. We also saw a lot of Trump folks claiming the Democrats were going around pretending to be cops or election officials and telling people to get out of line, though none of those allegations have been verified. And obviously, we'll keep our eyes open for that. But those main claims of voter suppression and election interference, they were amplified by tons of people all the way at the top, with this including the Republican National Committee, which wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Commonwealth alleging numerous concerning reports from voters about polling sites closing early, not accepting voters, and not counting ballots. The county officials have repeatedly said that these allegations of voter suppression fundamentally misunderstand how the system works and what the county is actually obligated to do under the 2019 law, with the Bucks County spokesperson explaining the Board of Elections office is not a polling place. On-demand, in-person mail-in ballots are not early voting. This service is offered as a courtesy to voters because we have the equipment to do so. We are happy to accommodate as many voters as we can, but the fact remains that this is not a polling place and our staff needs to be allowed time to fulfill their other duties in furtherance of carrying out the election. But then also another top county official echoing that and explicitly saying that the confusion here has arisen because, quote, political parties and organizations across the political spectrum have been misinforming voters about what on-demand mail-in voting is and is not. But literally as I was recording, a judge has also now hit back on the county's version of things. Because just this morning, the Trump campaign filed a lawsuit against Bucks County seeking to extend the mail-in ballot application deadline. And just hours later, a judge granted that request, extending the deadline to 5 p.m. this Friday. And in that ruling, writing that Bucks County violated the Pennsylvania election code after, quote, turning away voters who sought to apply for a mail-in ballot and receive one in person before the deadline, and ordering the county to allow anyone who wishes to apply for, receive, vote, and return a mail-in ballot before the close of business on Friday. Right, so it seems like there are contradictory understandings of how Pennsylvania's on-demand mail-in system works and what county officials are obligated to do. Right, specifically, legally whether they need to provide people with ballots immediately or not. Though personally, I think at least with the extension, this is a good thing, right? Hopefully it'll help voters who are confused or got wrong information by giving them more time. Because regardless, everyone deserves the right to vote and for that vote to count. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.